everyone, I'm Kara the Mental Traveler, and for today's video I'm going to talk about The Painted Veil, and since I really love the novel and the movie, I decided to analyze them both. The Painted Veil is a novel published in 1925 by W. Somerset Maugham. It's been adapted into movies 3 times, but today I'm only going to talk about the last one, which came out in 2006. It was directed by John Curran, and it stars Edward Norton, Naomi Watts, Liv Schreiber, Diana Riggs, and Toby Jones. Also, regarding the novel, this is the first book by Maugham that I've read, and I really liked it. The writing style is really simple and easy to understand and clean, and yet I was amazed by the author's ability to transport me to the life of a woman in China 90 years ago, whether it's Shanghai or a small village at the foothills. And the book is more philosophical, whereas the movie is this sort of more personal approach into the marriage between Edward Norton and Naomi Watts' characters, and it portrays the inner motivations and struggles that they go along through the movie, but it's perfectly casted. There's so much chemistry between everyone, particularly these two, and the film has these lines that the screenwriter came up with that are not in the book that are really good. Besides, the movie was shot in China, and whereas the book transported me to that time, it was really amazing to see all these beautiful landscapes. In any case, the reason behind the title The Painted Veil, I think, represents this concept that pretty often we don't really know the people that we're supposedly close with. We form this idea of them in our minds, and that's what we see. So we're seeing them through the painted veil, but when that veil falls down, at times we're as stunned and horrified by what they really are like, and in other times we're more moved by their real nature than by what we thought they were. In any case, the author came up with the title due to a sonnet by Percy Bysshe Shelley that begins like this: "Lift not the painted veil that those who live call life." And I should mention that if you want to avoid any spoilers, then you should watch this video up to the point where I start analyzing the movie and the book. But before that, it's spoiler free. Whether you watch this till the end or not, I highly recommend both the movie and the novel. They're very different, but they're both beautiful stories. Before the movie came out, I saw the trailer first, and I really loved it. I think it's one of my favorite trailers ever. And then I watched the movie and I completely fell for it, and so I had to read the book, which I also adore, but as I said, they're very different. But why do I like The Painted Veil so much? Well, besides the fact that I really like watching or reading about difficult marriages, I find really interesting the lives of British people during the 20th century living in the colonies. And also because I love stories that deal with people who barely know each other, but due to the circumstances like isolation or social expectations, they end up opening to each other even though they're strangers in a way that they would never do were they living in these sort of more normal circumstances. W. Somerset Maugham was first inspired to write this story after he visited Italy when he was a young man. Dante's Purgatory was a great source of inspiration for the author, and he mentions at the start of the book that this was a really unique working experience for him because rather than creating a story based on characters that he had come up with, he had to write these characters and adjust them to the story that he had already come up with a long time ago. I hope that makes sense. In any case, the story is set in the 1920s in China, Hong Kong, and England, and it begins in London with the protagonist Kitty. She's this 26-year-old woman. She's very pretty, and yet she's very vain and spoiled, and she's been proposed to many times before the story begins, but for some reason or another she hasn't accepted anyone yet. And when the tale begins, she's having this difficult time at home because her parents, especially her mother, is always nagging at her about the fact that she's getting quite old and her parents can't support her anymore. And then one day Kitty meets Dr. Walter Fane. He's this good-looking bacteriologist stationed in Shanghai, but he's a very quiet and timid and reserved man. But he falls for Kitty since the first moment he meets her, even though Kitty finds him very uninteresting. She agrees to marry him even though they don't really know each other, basically because she wants to escape her mother and the pressure that she is putting on her. But since the start of the marriage, Kitty is bored. She and Walter are very different in personalities, and they have different tastes in almost everything. Kitty just can't fall for Walter because he isn't very communicative with her. But then Kitty's life changes when she meets Charlie Townsend, a handsome married man who works in the British government. Charlie is very different to Walter, and he and Kitty share a lot of things in common. Since the start, they quickly hit it off, and it doesn't take them long to become lovers. And Kitty falls head over heels for Charlie, but her bliss doesn't last forever because one day Walter finds out about the affair. And the way Walter responds to being cuckolded is to propose Kitty with an ultimatum. He tells her that they can either divorce quietly if Charlie, the lover, promises that he'll marry Kitty Charlie as soon as he gets his own divorce. Or the other option is for Kitty and Walter to stay together and avoid any scandals, but Kitty will have to accompany Walter to Meitanfu. This inland village in China has been struck by a cholera epidemic. And Kitty is horrified by the latter proposition, and she is sure that Charlie will be willing to divorce his wife for her, but she is deeply disappointed because when her lover hears about this ultimatum, he makes it very clear that he will never divorce his wife. And at this, Kitty's eyes are open and she realizes that not only is Charlie a selfish man, but also that her husband Walter had known all along that Charlie would disappoint her, and that maybe his proposition of taking her into a cholera-stricken village is actually this sort of punishment for her, and he maybe even hopes that she'll get cholera and die. And I will stop giving away the plot of the Painted Veil here because, as I said, up till this point this was a video without spoilers, because from now on the novel and the movie diverge, so I will be discussing those differences in the analysis. If you're gonna stop watching this now, thank you very much for seeing my video, and in the description box below you can find a link to the movie's trailer and to its IMDB page, as well as a link to the book's Goodreads page. I give both the movie and the novel a 5 out of 5 star rating, but I don't want to compare which one is better. They're different and they both have really interesting and important approaches to the story. So I'll just let you decide which one do you prefer, or maybe you'll like both of them as I do. She's likable since the start of the movie, in my taste, whereas in the novel, it caused me a little bit of trouble to warm up to her. But Kitty is more composed in a crisis in the film, and she doesn't make a fool of herself before Charlie as much as she does in the book. So I think she has more backbone in the movie. But the film is more focused on her relationship with her husband than with her relationships with the people she meets when she is at the cholera-stricken village. But since her marriage is different in the book, I guess it's obvious they could focus more time on their marriage than in the novel. In any case, whether it's the book or its movie adaptation, Walter's plan of taking Kitty to the cholera-stricken village, on the maybe slight hope that she will die, backfires because she actually ends up thriving from the experience. She survives and conquers her past and learns from it and becomes a better person, and in both film and novel, though their ending is different, Kitty ends up living life as this new and better version of herself. It's told solely from her point of view, so we really get to examine with detail this evolution that she goes throughout the book. She begins as this spoiled and vain woman who is unable to make her husband out, but manages to learn her lessons before the end and realizes not only her worth, but she also can identify the reasons why she was vain, and she ends up being really clever and she can read other people's natures easily, all except her husband, I'm afraid. But I guess I felt more empathy for her in the book because we really get into her shoes and understand why she was likable at the start. She's a product of her upbringing. She was always treated as this beautiful object who wasn't expected to have any real substance. But once she arrives at the cholera-stricken village where no one cares about her look, her worth is revealed to her throughout the story and all these actions and thoughts that she does and has. In the film, Walter ends up forgiving Kitty for being unfaithful to him and allows himself to give his marriage another chance and shows Kitty that he really never stopped loving her. And he is thus sweeter in the movie, and we get to see a lot more of him because, as I've said, the film is more focused on their marriage and his overall interactions and relationships with the town. And in the movie, I guess he's this sort of tragic romantic hero. I could imagine the pain he was feeling even when he was being horrible and revengeful towards Kitty. And the movie is also centered around this whole backstory that the book doesn't cover. That is how the nationalists in China were sort of revolting against the British government there. And Walter even ends up defending Kitty from some of these nationalists at some point. Walter was a mystery to me in the novel because we never get his point of view, and he's a really difficult character for me to understand. Since Kitty doesn't really grasp his nature and his motivations, I wasn't able to do it on my own. It was hard for me to empathize or warm up to this distant figure in the background we don't really deal with that much. And also, the reader sees this growth in Kitty because we read the story through her point of view, but I never thought that Walter learned anything or evolved for the better, but I know he's a more complex character because the film was able to identify those characteristics that make him so hard for me to understand and translate them into this beautiful, tragic, romantic figure that I've mentioned. They forgive each other, and love blossoms between them at one point. We even get the sense that they were suited for each other all along, but they had to learn from their mistakes in order to achieve this and come to know and love the persons they were really like when the painted veil was not blinding them. Walter never forgives Kitty and she never falls in love with him, and as I've said, the book doesn't even show them together that much. Just as they learn that Kitty is with child, and despite the fact that they don't really know if the baby would be Walter's or Charlie's, things seem to be going pretty good for the couple. But then Walter gets cholera and Kitty ends up taking care of him during his final hours, and they ask each other for forgiveness, and it's really moving. And Kitty ends up having a son, and around 6 years after Walter's death, she encounters in the streets of London by accident her former lover Charlie. It's clear that he means nothing to her now, because even when he hints at her that they should probably see each other again, she declines the offer and walks away happily with her son, showing this very different woman from the start of the film, one who is wiser. When Kitty learns that she's pregnant, it's not really clear what Walter intends to do if they survive the cholera epidemic, but in the end it doesn't matter because he falls ill and he dies. But it wasn't very clear to me whether he really forgave Kitty at the end. I think he didn't, and maybe that's more realistic, but I thought it harmed the character. It took out complexity and depth. There was this chance for him to grow as a human being and he doesn't take it. But Kitty does grow, and even if the story lacked romance, I love how in the end the message that I got from the story was that Kitty, this proud woman, is humbled, that she hopes her baby will be a daughter so she can teach her to avoid the mistakes that Kitty committed. Kitty even tells her father at one point towards the end that she sort of knew why Walter wanted to marry her. He was so desperately in love with her looks and he wanted to make love to her so much. He knew the only way he could do this was to marry her and support her throughout all their lives. But Kitty wants her daughter to learn that she's worth more than how she looks. She wants her to stand on her own 2 feet. So it was really rewarding to read how Kitty wants to avoid committing the mistakes her mother did on her because she can recognize them and she doesn't mind admitting her flaws. But also towards the end she does some things that I wasn't really that happy about. For example, once Walter dies, she goes back to Charlie, her former lover, and they sleep together again. But on hindsight, since she realizes what a big mistake that was, I guess that corrections could be justified in a way. In any case, I believe this is all I have to say for this video. Thank you very much for watching my analysis of the story of the Painted Veil, and I ask you please to comment on whether you like more the book or the movie, or maybe don't agree with me with something or you don't like the storyline. I want to hear from you as well. And I'll be leaving in the description box below a link to the IMDB page and the trailer for the movie, as well as a link to the Goodreads page for the book. Thank you kindly for watching. I'm Caro, the Mental Traveler, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.